basically is infinite impulse response, right? So impulse response is of infinite duration, and hence we call it as infinite impulse response filters. So this figure shown here the tells you that the impulse response is of infinite duration. The coefficients of the impulse response continues indefinitely. If such is the response of the impulse, then we call it as the infinite impulse response. Looking into the difference equation of the IIR, then what we see is that there are coefficients in which the output depends not only on the present state of the input, but it also depends on past inputs along with some past output terms. So output is a function of input along with past output terms. Now why do we need this past output terms, or why do we observe that in IR filters output is a function of past output terms? It is because since the impulse response is of infinite duration, right, to get these infinite coefficients there needs to be some kind of feedback energy, and this feedback is given by the feedback output terms, right? So the previous output terms feed back energy into the filter and keeps it going, and that's the reason why we get infinite coefficients. So these dependency of the output of the filter on the past output terms is nothing but said to be the feedback to the system, and these dependency of the output on these past output terms gives us results into an impulse response which is of infinite duration. That's the major difference between IIR and FIR. In FIR, we have seen that output is a function of only present and past input terms. There is no dependency on past output terms at all. Whereas in IIR filters, output is a function of past output term, and that results into a kind of feedback into the system which makes the impulse response to tend to infinity with some finite number of samples existing over a long duration of time. Now let us look into what is the principle behind designing IR filters. So IR filters basically are designed with the principle that we convert the analog transfer function into digital transfer function. Yesterday we have seen the approach of FIR. The FIR approach is entirely different as compared to the approach taken by IR filters. IR filters basically are based on the principle of transforming the analog transfer function into a digital transfer function meeting the desired specifications. So we start with an analog transfer function that satisfies our given specifications. Filter design begins with filter specifications. So we first choose an analog transfer function that satisfies the given specifications. Once we have an analog transfer function that meets our specifications, the aim is now to convert it into a digital transfer function that finally meets our desired output specification of the filter. Now, why is this approach? Why is IIR filter based on the principle of transforming an analog transfer function into a digital transfer function? So let us look into that with an example. So this is a simple low pass filter, an RC low pass filter is shown to you, and then high pass filter is also shown to you. This is the analysis of input and output of the low pass filter, right? So V out is the output, V in is the input, and the relationship between V out and V in is as shown here, right? Taking the Laplace transform of this output and ratio of output by input, taking the Laplace transform and finding the transfer function of the system gives us a response which is of this form, 1 upon 1 plus S. So this is said to be the first order, simplest first order low pass transfer function. Similarly, if I go for a high pass filter, look at the input output relationships. Output is nothing but the voltage across the registers. If I apply simple voltage division and find the output voltage, and then take the ratio of output by input, right, and find the transfer function, which is the ratio of output by input using the Laplace domain, I get an output which is of the form S upon 1 plus S, right. So this is said to be the simplest first order high pass transfer function. So this is a low pass transfer function, this is a high pass transfer function. With this example, what I need to show you is that we already have existing analog designs available to us. Analog transfer functions representing the filters are already available. The designs, the details of these filters are already available to us, right. What we need to do is use this existing analog approximations and then transform it into digital. That is the reason why the IR filters are based on the principle of transforming HS into H of Z, because we have abundant availability of all the approximations already for all the type of filters in analog domain. So, looking at the advantages of the approach, it is said to be that it's a well designed method existing for analog filters. We already have well designed methods as just discussed. We already have the analog approximations available for all the type of filters. So it is advantageous to utilize these design procedures which are already well developed for the analog filters. Digital filter design methods based on analog design formulas are rather simple to implement. So the method of transforming H of S into H of Z is simpler design approach of obtaining the digital filters. Almost all the methods rely on converting analog filter to digital one. So all the IIR filter methods are based on this principle of transforming the analog approximations into digital approximations. Let us look at what are the issues involved in IIR. So now we know that we are going to follow the principle of transforming analog transfer function H of S and directly obtain a digital filter transfer function H of Z. But while doing this transformation, there are major two issues which need to be carefully resolved while designing the IIR filters. And the two issues which needs to be taken care are stability and relationship between analog and digital frequency. Because we are transforming an analog system directly into digital system, we need to take care whether we are obtaining a stable system, because we start with a stable analog system H of S and we transform it into H of Z, right? When we obtain our digital filter, we need to take an extreme check that whether the resultant digital filter is also stable. If we start with a stable system, it should result into a stable digital system also. So that care need to be taken. Now how do we take that care? We take a care of stability by looking at the placement of the poles. So we know that in S domain, the stability is respect to the S plane, right? All the poles in the S plane must lie in the left half of the S plane, right? Then we say that the given analog system is stable. All the poles should lie in the left half of the S plane. Then we call the system to be a stable system. So when we transform that analog system into digital system, we go into the Z domain. So this is the Z plane. This is the real axis and the imaginary axis of the Z plane, right? So these poles which were in the stable region in the S plane should be placed inside the circle, so that we call that the system, which is the digital system, turns out to be a stable system. If all the poles on the left half of the S plane are lying inside the unit circle, then we say that we have obtained a stable digital system. So how do we comment on stability? We comment on the stability of the IIR filter by looking at the mapping of the S plane to Z plane. This is said to be mapping of S plane to Z plane. So if all the poles on the left half of the S plane, they lie within the unit circle in the Z plane, then we can say that we have obtained a stable digital system. The next issue which is observed in IIR filter is the relationship between analog and digital frequency, right? Whether we are obtaining a linear relationship or it is landing into a non-linear relationship, right? What happens when the analog frequencies are getting transformed into digital, right? What is their relationship? Is there any kind of aliasing problem seen there? All these issues need to be resolved when we design IIR filters based on the approach of transforming H of S into H of Z. So when we are now going to discuss few methods of IIR filter design, these two issues are going to be closely resolved when we finally discuss the methods on IIR filter design. We will look at the stability of the method that we are going to discuss. We will even look at what is the relationship of analog and digital filters when we'll discuss the IIR methods. So there are basically two IIR filter design techniques. It is impulse invariant method and bilinear Z transform method. Let us look at the first, the impulse invariant method of IIR filter design. Let us look at the first approach of designing the IIR filter. So the impulse invariant method, as the name tells, impulse invariant method is based on the principle that it transforms the analog impulse response into a digital impulse response by simply sampling it. So the principle is that we obtain a digital impulse response. The impulse response that we get finally indicates the filter coefficient. So we obtain the filter coefficients simply by sampling the analog impulse response. And hence we say that we obtain the impulse response from the analog impulse response, and hence the impulse response remains invariant. This impulse response remains invariant. That's the reason why we say it is impulse invariant method. Right? So what is the principle? The principle is that we are going to obtain a digital impulse response or a discrete time impulse response from the analog impulse response on the basis of sampling the analog impulse response. Now how is this method? Where does this particular method come into picture? Right? In the process of designing impulse invariant method is what we'll look into detail of impulse invariant method. So let us look at the step. How do we design an impulse invariant method, and let us look where is the principle lying here in these methods. As discussed, impulse invariant method or we could say as discussed earlier, IIR filters are based on the technique of transforming the analog transfer function into digital transfer function. So our aim is, what is our aim? Our aim is to start with some filter specifications, and with those filter specifications finally we design the digital filter. In IIR filters, given the specifications, we always start with the analog transfer function. So we obtain the analog transfer function H of S which satisfies the given specifications. So we start with H of S, and what we finally intend to get? We finally intend to get H of Z. What does H of Z represents? H of Z represents a transfer function of the digital filter. So understand the principle behind designing the filters. Our approach is we'll be starting with H of S. Right, our approach is that we'll be starting with H of S. H of S indicates the analog transfer function, and we are going to transform this into a digital transfer function H of Z, right, where H of Z indicates the digital transfer function, the filter transfer function, right? So with this aim in front of us, let us look at what are the steps involved in impulse invariant method. So in impulse invariant method, the very first step is, once we have our analog transfer function satisfying the given specification, we first obtain the inverse Laplace transform of it. We take inverse Laplace transform of the given transfer function. When we take inverse Laplace transform, we are transforming from S domain to Z domain. We are transforming from S domain to Z domain. That's why you could see here we have obtained h of t from h of S. We have transformed with inverse Laplace transform. We have transformed from S domain to the time domain back. So we obtain the analog impulse response. Understand each of the term. What is h of t indicating? H of t actually indicates the analog filter, analog transfer function, analog impulse response, you could say. Right? So h of t indicates the analog impulse response. Right? So we need to now obtain the digital impulse response. You could say discrete impulse response. So how do I obtain a discrete impulse response? By sampling it. And we know what is the principle of sampling. The principle of sampling is we replace t by nts, where ts is nothing but the sampling period. Ts indicates the sampling period, right? So there is a sampling process involved here. What do we identify? That in impulse invariant method, there is sampling process involved. So we are sampling a continuous analog impulse response at discrete time instance nts and obtain the discrete impulse response hn. So we identify that there is a sampling process involved in the process of designing impulse invariant method. Once we obtain the discrete impulse response, this is nothing but our filter coefficients. This indicates the filter coefficients. With these filter coefficients, now we design our system, digital filter system, by taking the Z transform of it. So we take the Z transform of the discrete impulse response and obtain the digital filter H of Z. So H of Z indicates the digital filter, digital transfer function of the filter. So these are the steps involved in designing impulse invariant method. So let us understand these steps with certain example. So consider an analog filter, analog system, which is described by the analog transfer function h of s as shown here. So this is a simple example of an analog filter given to you. We're having an analog transfer function h of s as c upon s plus alpha. Now, as discussed in the previous slide, the very first step is, once we have an analog system, we need to take its inverse. We are going to take the Laplace inverse of the given analog system. So when we take the Laplace inverse of this, we have obtained the equation as c e raised to minus alpha t. So when we take the inverse Laplace transform of this, we get c into e raised to minus alpha t. So this is your impulse response of the analog system. Now we obtain the digital impulse response by sampling the analog impulse response. So how do we sample it? We simply sample it by replacing t by nts. So in this equation, whatever equation of analog transfer function we have got, if we replace t by nts, we get the discrete impulse response. You could see here we have replaced t by nts. So we have replaced this t by nts and we have obtained the discrete impulse response. Right? We have replaced t by nts and we have obtained the discrete impulse response. So this represents my filter coefficients. Right? And look at the next step. Now we obtain the Z transform of it so that we get the transfer function of our digital filter. So taking the Z transform of this particular system, we get the equation as C upon 1 minus e raised to alpha ts Z raised to minus 1. Right? So this is representing now the Z transform of the could say this represents the digital transfer function of our given problem, right? So this is the way we design an IIR filter using impulse invariant method. If you closely look at your impulse response, friends, look at the impulse response, right? There is an exponential term there, right? E raised to minus alpha n ts. If you particularly plot this signal, how would your impulse response look like? How would the impulse response be? So it is exponentially decreasing signal, right? So you will observe that you have infinite number of samples, is it not? We don't know where this signal approaches zero. It is exponentially decaying signal, right? So we observe that this impulse response has infinite number of coefficients here, and that's why this is the impulse response of an IIR filter. Right, this HN indicates the impulse response of an IIR filter because it is of infinite duration. Once we understand now the way of designing impulse invariant method, we said that we may always have to look at two issues regarding the IIR filters. The two issues were stability and the relationship between analog and digital filter. Let us look at the first issue, which is stability. We said that the impulse invariant method can be designed by simply sampling the analog signal into a digital signal. But if whether this approach of transforming H of S into H of Z by the process of sampling is resulting into a stable filter, it is what needs to be checked. And let us now check the stability, and this stability is checked by doing the mapping. So we are going to map S plane into Z plane, and then we'll see whether all the poles of the whether the poles which are lying on the left half of the S plane are landing inside the Z, inside the unit circle in the Z plane. If that is so, then we will say that impulse invariant method is resulting into a stable digital filter. So let us look at the stability by doing certain mathematical analysis. So here we are starting the mathematical analysis by comparing two transforms. So I have compared here S domain with Z domain. So this is the Laplace transform equation, right? So what you see here is Laplace transform, and I'm comparing Laplace transform with Z transform. So this is Z transform. So I'm comparing both the transforms. We already know what is the equation of Laplace transform. So Laplace transform is minus infinity to plus infinity ht e raised to minus st dt. We denote the Laplace transform as h of s. Z transform we denoted as h of z, which is summation minus infinity to plus infinity hn z raised to minus n. So we know that these are the transforms as Laplace transform and the Z transform. If I now want to find out the relationship between the Laplace transform and Z transform, I can have a relationship derived by comparing the two transforms, right? So if I look at the two equations carefully, I can obtain h of n. I can obtain this h of n from h of t by sampling the signal. Is it not? If I replace t by nts, then I can obtain h of n from h of t. Under that case, then these two equations can now be compared, and we can say that the relationship between the two will be z is equal to e raised to minus st. Right? As we said that these two equations can be compared when we say that we are going to sample this signal. Right? So we'll replace t by nts. So this signal becomes discrete. This becomes hn. E raised to minus st becomes, so if I compare, right, if I replace t by nts, I get this to be my h of n. E raised to minus st becomes e raised to minus s nts. Correct? So now we have hn and hn, correct? This term becomes e raised to minus nts, and this is z raised to minus n. Integration becomes summation the moment I sample it, right? So integration becomes summation when we are going to sample this analog signal, right? So the only thing that needs to be compared is this term e raised to minus nts with z raised to minus n. So if I now compare it, what do I get? Z raised to minus n, I'm going to compare it with e raised to minus nts, correct? And that's why we get z to be equal to e raised to sts as shown here. Right, so when I do this comparison, I get here z is equal to e raised to sts. So I have compared Laplace transform and z transform and obtained a relation between z and s, and the relationship is shown here. In the next step, to further have a analysis of these two, we are going to put them in polar form. So z expressed in polar form is r e raised to j omega, and s expressed in polar form is sigma plus j omega. So I'll replace z by r e raised to j omega in its polar form. I'll replace here s in its polar form as sigma plus j omega. So now I have real parts and imaginary parts seen here, right? So if I now want to separate out the real and imaginary parts, what I need to do? So I have the first term r e raised to j omega, whereas in the second term I will separate out the real and imaginary parts. So I get here e raised to sigma ts, and the other term which goes is e raised to j omega ts. So this way I have separated out the two terms from the right hand side. Now I can have a close comparison to identify which are the real parts and imaginary parts from these terms. So R is the real part on the left hand side, whereas e raised to sigma ts is the real part on the right hand side. So I'll have a comparison of real parts. So this gives me, if I equate the real parts, I have got the term as R e raised to sigma ts. Similarly, I will now equate the imaginary part. So what is the imaginary part here? E raised to j omega, and the imaginary part here is e raised to j sigma ts. So what is the term associated with the imaginary term is omega, and the term associated here is sigma ts. So comparing the imaginary parts, I get omega is equal to omega ts. Okay, before we go ahead friends, remember the notations. So this omega is used for digital frequencies. Okay, these are digital angular frequencies, whereas this omega we will always use for analog angular frequencies. Okay, so remember we are going to use this omega for representing digital frequencies, digital angular frequencies, and whereas this omega will use for representing analog angular frequencies. Okay, even though we spell them the same, the meaning of it is different. So keep it in mind that all the books follow the same representations, where omega represents the digital angular frequency, whereas this omega is representing the analog angular frequency. So by equating the real and imaginary parts, I have got the real part to be r e raised to sigma ts and imaginary part to be omega is equal to omega ts. Now we will look at the real part to check the stability of the system. Our aim is to check whether the given impulse invariant method is a stable system so that we can use it for designing IR filters. So for that we will now look at the real parts that we have obtained. So this is the equation we have obtained by equating the real parts. Let us put on certain conditions and get the values by putting those conditions on these equations. The first condition that we'll put is, we will say that if sigma is less than 0, if I put the value of sigma here as sigma less than 0, it means that I am taking sigma as negative values of sigma. So with respect to the S-plane, right, with respect to the S-plane, I am talking about the sigma values which are on the negative values, means this is the axis which I am talking about, the negative axis, right, sigma negative axis. So if sigma takes negative values, you can say that the exponential term becomes negative. So if exponential term becomes negative, we know that this is exponentially decreasing signal, right? Exponentially decaying signal. And that's why whenever we have an exponentially decaying signal, the magnitude of the R will definitely be less than 1. Right, because since we have a negative sign here, sigma is less than 0, sigma is taking negative values, this exponential term becomes exponentially decreasing signal. Therefore R will always have a value which is less than 1. So what is the first thing that we have obtained? If we take sigma less than 0, it means that I'm talking about this part of the S-plane, right? We have obtained r to be less than 1. What is r? R is the radius of this circle. right? So if our sigma is less than 0, then we obtain r less than 1. It means that we are talking about this region. When we say sigma is less than 0, we are talking about this part of the S-plane. And when we say sigma less than 1, we are talking about this area in the Z-plane. So what do we observe? The left half of the S-plane is lying inside the unit circle. With the first case, we obtain that the left half of the S-plane is lying inside the unit circle, right? It means that we have done a mapping from of the left half of the S-plane inside the unit circle with the first case. For the second case, when sigma is greater than 0, it means that sigma is taking all the positive values. With sigma taking all the positive values, what we observe is that it is exponentially increasing signal, and therefore r will take a value which is greater than 1. So sigma greater than 0, it means that we are talking about the right half of the S-plane where sigma takes positive values. So this portion of the S-plane is getting mapped in the region where r is greater than 1. It means that this part of the S-plane is lying outside the unit circle, right? The right half of the S-plane is lying outside the unit circle. And when sigma is 0, means that this particular point lies on the unit circle. So with this analysis, what we have observed is that if the poles are on the left half of the S-plane, they are landing inside the unit circle, which satisfies the condition of stability. As discussed earlier, we said that if there is a proper mapping from S-plane to Z-plane, if the poles which are on the left half of the S-plane indicating a stable analog system, if it gets placed inside the unit circle, then we obtain a stable digital system, and this is satisfied with the analysis as shown here, and therefore we say that the impulse invariant method results into a stable system, right? The impulse invariant method results into a stable system. Therefore, stable analog filters transform into stable digital filters. So with impulse invariant method, we are obtaining a stable IIR filter. Now let us look at the second issue. The second issue is relating the analog and digital frequencies. So what is the relation between analog and digital frequencies when we are transforming Hs to H of Z? Is there a one-to-one mapping or a different mapping is observed? We expect that there should be a one-to-one mapping, right? So what is really observed, what really happens in impulse invariant method is what we'll analyze now. So for that, what we should know is the range of analog frequencies and the range of digital frequencies. The range of analog frequencies, right? Range of your analog frequencies are right from minus infinity to plus infinity, right? This is the large range or dynamic range observed in analog frequencies, whereas the range of digital frequencies is limited. The range of digital frequencies is from, if I say this is capital F and I'll assign a small f to digital frequencies, then digital frequencies are restricted from the range of minus pi to pi. So we expect that there should be a one-to-one mapping between this range, but that is not observed so. What we are observing when we are mapping these frequencies is that we are observing that there is multiple mapping of the frequencies, right? So if I use this equation, omega is equal to omega ts, right? The first range of omega frequency. So if omega takes a range from 0 to pi by t, right? You can put and check the value. If you take your omega, right? If I take this omega value to be pi by ts, right? This is the maximum value I obtained, right? So if I take the omega value as pi by Ts, what is the digital frequency obtained is the maxed digital frequency, right? So with a simple value of omega analog frequency, taking a value of pi by Ts, we reach to the maximum limit of digital frequencies, right? And therefore what this is the region that we are talking about. So if omega, this analog frequency, see we are talking about the analog frequencies here we are talking about the digital frequencies, right? So if the analog frequency is in the range from 0 to pi by Ts, right, all these frequencies are getting mapped inside the Z plane, showing that we are reaching to the maximum value of omega to be pi, because this range from digital frequencies go from 0 to 2 pi, right? So minus, you could say here 0 to pi, and here pi to minus pi, right? And that's why we say that a simple small range of analog frequencies from 0 to pi by t is mapped in the entire frequencies in the Z plane. If I go to the further next 2 pi region, right, this 2 pi region further also gets mapped inside the unit circle, and that's the reason why we are seeing multiple mappings, right? If I further take a next 2 pi region of this also gets mapped inside the Z plane, and that's why we say that mapping is not linear here, right? The mapping is resulting into many to one mapping, right? Many range of frequencies are getting mapped into one range in digital frequencies. So this is a drawback which is observed in impulse invariant method, that we are not obtaining one-to-one mapping between analog and digital frequencies. It means that the frequencies from minus pi to pi should be covering the region minus infinity to plus infinity. Or in other words, when I'm transforming h of s to h of z, minus infinity to plus infinity should have been mapped in the region from minus pi to pi, right? So there should have been one-to-one mapping. Entire region from minus infinity to plus infinity should have been covered in the region from minus pi to pi. But what do we observe? We don't observe that. We observe that only certain regions are getting mapped inside, and there are such multiple regions which are getting mapped in the same region of 0 to in the same region from minus pi to pi, and hence we are seeing many to one mapping, and this effect is resulting into aliasing, right? This effect results into aliasing in impulse invariant method. So we identified one drawback in impulse invariant method. Now let us analyze impulse invariant method with a certain example. So this example, just I'll quickly switch on with the steps. Okay, so there is given an analog transfer function, and you have been asked to find the digital transfer function h of z by impulse invariant method. The very first step, as discussed earlier, is that we need to take the inverse Laplace transform of the given analog transfer function to obtain the analog impulse response h of t. So we have taken the Laplace inverse and obtained the analog transfer function h of t. So the Laplace inverse of this can be obtained by first of all taking the partial fraction expansion of this, so that the complex system becomes simpler. So here we have first of all applied partial fraction expansion to this. By applying partial fraction expansion, we have separated the terms, and now we can take the Laplace transform. So 1.5 e raised to minus t is the Laplace inverse of this term, and e raised to minus 2t is the Laplace transform of the second term. So we have first of all simplified the given transfer function by applying partial fraction expansion, and then we have taken the Laplace inverse of it, resulting into an equation for analog impulse response. Now the next step is to obtain the digital or discrete impulse response by simply sampling. So we are sampling that continuous analog system, and we are obtaining the discrete impulse response by replacing t by nts. The moment we replace t by nts, it is that we have performed sampling. So wherever there was t in the equation of h of t, we have replaced it by nts. So here is where we have replaced t by nts and obtained the discrete impulse response. The last step is now we obtain the digital transfer function h of z by taking the z transform of this. So we have taken the z transform of this discrete impulse response and obtain the digital transfer function of the given filter. So this is how you apply the technique of impulse invariant method and get the digital filter designed. So summarizing the impulse invariant method, the advantage is that it preserves the order and the stability of the analog filter. So measure is that it is maintaining the stability of the system. And what about the order? What about the order? Look at the given example. What was the order here? The order of your system is 2, right? So you could see that when you designed your system and when you simplify this, you observe that the order also remains 2. So it preserves the order. If you simplify this, cross multiply and simplify, the highest order that you will get will be 2, right? So that's the reason in the advantage we say it preserves the order. So whatever is the order of your analog system, the same order is observed in the digital system. So it preserves the order, and most important is that impulse invariant method is resulting into a stable system, right? Maintaining the order, and it also results into a stable system. But what are the disadvantages? The disadvantages is that this particular impulse invariant method is basically suited for low pass filters. They are not applicable for all the types of filters, right? So high pass filters and band pass filters, these impulse invariant method are not suitable. What is the reason behind it? Is basically the principle on which impulse invariant method works. Impulse invariant method works on the principle of sampling. So if you go for high pass filter, as you increase the frequencies, right, if you go for higher and higher frequencies, correspondingly there will be limitation with the sampling frequency. So the sampling frequency that you choose to sample your analog system to get your discrete impulse response, that f of s restricts to what frequencies you can design in impulse invariant method. Because if you go for high pass filter, for band pass filter, the range of input frequencies increases. As your range of input frequencies increases, we know as per sampling theorem, f of s should be greater than twice the maximum frequency, right? So if you increase the band of your input frequencies itself, you need to go on choosing very high sampling rate. And that's the reason why impulse invariant methods are not suitable for all the types of filters, especially the filters which are involving high frequency range. And there is a distortion in the shape of the frequency response due to aliasing. And if there is an aliasing observed, then aliasing changes the shape of the frequency response. So these are the disadvantages that we see. Even though impulse invariant method seems a very simpler method of designing IIR filter, there are certain disadvantages that restricts the use of impulse invariant method. Now let us look at the second approach of designing the IIR filter, which is bilinear Z transform. So BZT method is also based on the same principle of IIR filter design, which is transforming an analog system into digital system, right? So you have been given an analog system H of S, and you are going to design or transform it into digital transfer function H of Z. So principle is same, but here there is no sampling observed. The way we have seen it for impulse invariant method. In BZT method, there is no sampling of analog transfer function to obtain a discrete impulse response, right? You are going to, there's no sampling observed here. In fact, in bilinear Z transform, there is a direct conversion from H of S to H of Z. And that direct conversion is simply replacing S by 2Ts 1 minus Z inverse by 1 plus Z inverse. If you simply replace H of S by replace S in the given transfer function, you result into a digital transfer function H of Z by replacing S in the analog transfer function by a relationship 2 by ts 1 minus z inverse upon 1 plus z inverse. And that's why it is said that there is a direct conversion from h of s to h of z simply by replacing s by this particular equation. Right? Now, if this is the simpler approach, if there is such a direct approach involved, we have to resolve two issues before we finalize or accept that this simple conversion can give me my digital transfer function. So for that, the two issues that need to be resolved are the stability and the relationship between analog and digital frequencies. So now we'll first of all check the stability of the bilinear Z transform method, that whether a direct replacement of S into Z by replacing S by 2ts 1 minus Z inverse by 1 plus Z inverse is really giving us a stable IR filter. So we first of all will check the first issue, that is the stability of BZT method. So bilinear Z transform is also abbreviated as BZT method. So let us look at the stability of the method. So for stability, we need to do mapping from S plane to Z plane. So stability can be commented by looking at the mapping of the S plane to Z plane. So whether the complete left half of the S plane maps into the inside the unit circle. If that is so, then we can say that BZT method is resulting into a stable IIR filter. For that, we will start with the relationship between S and Z. So we know that if we replace S by 2 by Ts 1 minus Z inverse by 1 plus Z inverse, if we simply replace S by this, we get the digital transfer function h of Z. So we'll analyze this to get the relationship between S plane and Z plane. So a small rearrangement has been done and the negative powers of Z are adjusted to make it a positive power of Z. Now we will express S and Z in their polar forms. So S, as we know, is sigma plus j omega. Z, as we know, is r e raised to j omega. So wherever there is S, we have replaced it by sigma plus j omega. Wherever there is Z, you could see here we have replaced it by r e raised to j omega. To separate out the real and imaginary parts, we need to rationalize this. You could see here we have rationalized the term by multiplying and dividing by the term r e raised to minus j omega plus 1, r e raised to minus j omega plus 1. So we have rationalized the given equation by multiplying it by these terms. And now if we multiply and simplify, we can separate out the real and imaginary parts. So when we equate the real parts, we have got sigma to be this, and when we equate the imaginary parts after we simplify this equation, we can get the imaginary part to be this equation. So we have multiplied, simplified, and simplified real and equating the real and imaginary parts. The equations are shown here. So let us look at the real part now. To check the stability, we have to focus on the real part. So this is the equation of the real equation for after equating the real parts of the given equation. To simplify this and to understand the effect on the stability or the mapping from S plane to Z plane, let us formulate certain conditions. So let us look at case A, where we have assumed R values to be less than 1. If we take R values to be less than 1, so R values less than 1 with respect to Z plane means we are talking about the region inside the unit circle. So R less than 1. To check the stability, we have formulated the first case where we are assuming if our R is less than 1, R less than 1 indicates the region inside the unit circle. So if R is less than 1, so I'll substitute here if R is less than 1, so definitely this subtraction results into a magnitude which will be negative. Since R is less than 1, R square will be still a smaller number. That's the reason why when we do the subtraction, the numerator term gives me a magnitude which is negative. and we can say that sigma will have an overall a negative sign, which indicates that sigma is less than 0. So if we have taken r less than 1, it has resulted into sigma less than 0, meaning that sigma is taking negative values. So sigma is taking negative value indicates the left half of the S-plane. So what we observe, the region inside the Z-plane is landing into the left half of the S-plane. So stable region in the digital system is resulting into a stable region in the analog system. Similarly, let us check the region when r is greater than 1. So when r is greater than 1, it means that r is having a value more than 1. So definitely the subtraction of such a value will definitely make the sigma values always positive, because r is greater than 1. As r is greater than 1, this subtraction will have a magnitude which will always be positive. So when r is greater than 1, sigma is taking positive values. So r greater than 1 indicates the region outside the unit circle. R greater than 1 is the region outside the unit circle, which is the unstable region. So what is observed? The entire unstable region in the Z plane is getting mapped in the region where sigma is positive. Sigma positive indicates the right half of the S plane. So all the unstable region is getting mapped in the unstable region. Stable region is getting mapped inside the stable region. Unstable region is mapped in the unstable region. And when r is equal to 1, sigma will be 0. When you put r equal to 1, sigma will be 0. So r equal to 1 means on the unit circle is getting mapped on the j omega axis. So as you see, with this analysis we observe that there is resulting a stable analog system is getting converted into stable digital system. So the BZT method as seen here is giving us a stable digital system. So the first issue of stability is resolved. We see that we can use BZT method because if we start with a stable analog system, whatever digital filter is obtained using BZT method will also be stable. So we have now confirmed the stability for the BZT method. Now let us look at the second issue for the BZT method, which is relationship between analog and digital frequency. So when we look at the imaginary parts, when we have equated the imaginary parts, we have obtained this equation, friends. So when we look at this particular equation, we need to simplify it so that we can get the relationship between analog frequency omega and digital frequency omega. So for this, what we do is we'll first of all make r is equal to 1. We'll make it as a unit circle. With r is equal to 1, we are talking about the unit circle. Right? So with r is equal to 1, you get the term wherever there is r, it has been 1. Simplifying this, we get a tan function this. If we simplify this, we get a tan function. So 2 by ts tan of omega by 2. So the relationship that we have obtained is omega, that is the analog angular frequency, is equal to 2 by ts tan of omega by 2, where this omega indicates the digital angular frequency. If I write the other way, I get omega is equal to 2 tan inverse sigma ts by 2. So this is relating analog to digital, whereas this equation relates digital to analog. What do we observe? What is the relationship now? Now we know the equation between the analog and digital transfer function, digital frequencies, right? We now have the equations with us. Are we getting one-to-one mapping? Is this resulting into one-to-one mapping? That is what we need to check. Whereas what we had seen in impulse invariant method, there was many-to-one mapping. Right? How had we discussed that? We have to again look at the range of analog frequencies and digital frequencies. So analog frequencies ranges from minus infinity to plus infinity, whereas digital frequencies range from minus pi to pi. So when we can say that there is a one-to-one mapping, when complete minus infinity to plus infinity, all the analog frequencies are getting mapped inside minus pi to pi only once. Then we can say that there is one-to-one mapping. Are we getting such a relationship in BZT method is what we need to analyze. Right? So if we put here omega as minus pi, if we put here omega as minus pi, so tan of minus pi by 2 gives us omega as minus infinity. If we put omega as plus pi, if I put here omega as plus pi, so tan of pi by 2, as we know, will results into analog frequency of plus infinity. So you could see here that the complete minus infinity to plus infinity range is getting mapped inside minus pi to pi only once. And that's why we say that in BZT method, one-to-one mapping is obtained. Right? Why one-to-one? Because entire minus infinity to plus infinity is getting mapped inside minus pi to pi. And that's the reason why we say there is one-to-one mapping in BZT method. And this avoids the aliasing. This avoids aliasing, which was the major problem in impulse invariant method. So that aliasing problem is overcome in BZT method. Right? So we have overcome the problem that was observed in impulse invariant method. There is a one-to-one mapping here and there is no aliasing observed in impulse in BZT method. But in the process of obtaining one-to-one method, one-to-one mapping, there's one more observation which is seen here, that the relationship between analog and digital frequencies is related by a tan function. Right? There is a tan function coming in between the analog and digital frequencies, right? And tan basically is a non-linear function. Even though we are mapping complete minus infinity to plus infinity inside minus pi to pi, this is not giving us a linear relationship. In fact, because of the tan function, we are obtaining a non-linear relationship. Right? This, as you can see here, the tan function is plotted here. As seen, the tan function is not a linear function. In fact, what is the how is the function? The function is non-linear. We expect that minus infinity to plus infinity should be mapped within minus pi to pi. That is getting mapped. But how? This complete minus infinity to plus infinity of analog frequencies is mapped between minus pi to pi but with a non-linear relationship. You could see here. This is getting mapped with a non-linear relationship. We expected a linear relationship, but since there is a tan function involved, tan is basically a non-linear function, and that's why we observe a non-linear relationship between analog and digital frequencies. Now, what is the problem of this tan function, which is a non-linear function? What problem does it creates when we are transforming analog frequencies into digital frequencies is what we'll observe. So you could see here, this is the tan function which is plotted, right? This is the digital frequencies, this is the analog frequencies. So we have plotted this equation, tan of omega by 2, 2 by ts tan of omega by 2, and this is the non-linear function as we see. So if I relate analog to digital, if I transform analog frequencies to digital frequencies, what we observe? So if this is the range of analog frequencies I am transforming into digital, right? I could see here that the range of frequencies that were transformed is unequal, right? So all the lower frequencies, right, are getting expanded and higher frequencies are getting compressed. That is what is observed because of this non-linear relationship. I repeat, what do we observe? This is the analog frequencies, right? When we talk about lower frequencies, lower analog frequencies, what is happening to lower analog frequencies in digital domain? All the lower analog frequencies are getting expanded. And what is happening to higher frequencies? As I move on to higher frequencies, if I talk about this band of higher frequencies, all these higher frequencies, when I map it into digital domain, are getting compressed. So higher frequencies are getting compressed, lower frequencies are getting expanded. Why? Because there is a non-linear relationship. If it would have been linear relationship, everything would have been fine. But since there is a tan function involved, which is relating analog and digital frequencies, this tan function gives us such an response wherein we see compression and expansions of the frequencies, and this effect is called as warping. So we have identified a drawback in impulse invariant method, which is frequency warping. This effect is called as frequency warping, right, wherein we see compression and expansion of frequencies occurring when we map them, right? And this compression and expansion of the frequencies is called as frequency warping effect. So now if we have to use bilinear Z transform method, then the very first thing that we need to do is overcome this effect, overcome the effect of warping which is observed here. So this warping effect is overcome by pre-warping the frequencies, and this solution is called as pre-warping. Right? How do we overcome the warping effect in BZT? By doing pre-warping of the frequencies. What does that mean? It means that before we apply BZT, we will change the specifications of the input frequencies itself. It means that what we now know is, as the low frequencies are getting expanded and high frequencies are getting compressed, before we apply BZT, we will perform the reverse operations on this. So what we do is we will compress the lower frequencies and then apply BZT. So if we compress the lower frequencies and apply BZT, what BZT would do is it will expand the frequencies. So already compressed frequencies, when it will get expanded, the effect will be nullified. So instead of directly applying the frequencies as it is and observing this compression and expansion and distorting the inputs, better it would be that we change the input itself before we apply it to BZT. So what we do is, before we apply the input to BZT, we are going to change the frequencies itself, and that is said as pre-warping the frequencies. So we are going to pre-warp the frequencies. How are we going to pre-warp the frequencies? As we know that lower frequencies are going to be expanded, better what we will do is we will compress the lower frequencies and expand the higher frequencies, so that when we apply BZT, the reverse operation on it will compensate and bring back the frequencies to their original form. This is called as pre-warping. This is an additional method that needs to be performed when we use BZT method. So designing BZT method involves an additional step of performing pre-warping of the frequencies. Now let us look at the steps involved in using the BZT method to design the IIR filter. So steps 1 is, we with the given specifications, before we apply the BZT, we need to warp the frequencies. It means that we are going to pre-warp. Right? Before warping effect, we are going to pre-warp the frequencies. So by using the relationship, the tan relationship, we are going to pre-warp the frequencies. And then we are going to apply the BZT, so that the pre-warp frequencies, when applied with the after application of BZT, will be compensated, and the effect of non-linear relationship is made linear. So these are the steps that we need to do. So additional step which we observed to overcome the drawback in BZT method is to pre-warp the frequencies. Let us better understand these steps with an example. Okay, so before we switch to an example, there is one more thing that we need to use, is the transformations, right? So these transformations are useful when we solve the problem. So if there is a low pass to low pass transformation, we need to replace S by omega dash. If we are using low pass to high pass transformation, we have to replace S by omega dash by S. Similarly, for low pass to band pass, the transformation is as shown here. For low pass to band stop, we need to use this particular transformation. When I come to band pass and band stop, I know that we need to use two cutoff frequencies, omega 1 and omega 2, the lower cutoff frequency, upper cutoff frequencies. So there are two frequencies involved when we go for band pass and band stop. So using these transformations, we can design any type of IIR filter. Here's an example. You have been asked to design a second order IIR filter with a cutoff frequency of 100 Hz. The cutoff frequency is 100 Hz and the sampling frequency is 1000 samples per second. And we have been asked to design a low pass filter. We have been asked to design a low pass filter with a cutoff frequency of 100 Hz with a sampling frequency of 1000 Hz. And we have been given the approximation of the analog second order analog low pass filter, which is this. 1 upon s square root 2s plus 1 is the second order analog low pass filter transfer function given to us, and we have been asked to transform this into digital transfer function h of z by using BZT method. So, as discussed earlier, let us first find the digital cutoff frequency. How do we find? We have been given analog cutoff frequency. We have been given specifications in analog domain. This is what we need to first of all understand, that the given specifications is in analog domain. So we need to first of all transform the given specifications into digital specification. So let us calculate the digital cutoff frequency. And how do we calculate that? By normalizing the analog frequency. So f by fs, this is how we normalize it. So we have obtained the digital angular cutoff frequency by taking it as 2 pi f by, actually we do it f by fs. We obtain the digital cutoff frequency. To make it angular, we are multiplying it by 2 pi. So we have obtained the analog digital angular cutoff frequency 0.628. So given 100 Hertz in analog domain, its equivalent digital angular frequency is 0.628. Okay, given 100 Hertz analog cutoff frequency, what we have done in step number 1 is we have obtained the digital angular cutoff frequency of this low pass filter 0.628. Now we won't use this cutoff frequency as it is, because we know that if we use this cutoff frequency and design by BZT method, we know that this is going to be warped, because BZT is involving non-linear relationship of analog and digital frequencies. So definitely this frequency will be warped. And therefore, before we apply BZT, what we do in step number 2 is we are going to pre-warp this frequency. And we have obtained a new analog angular cutoff frequency omega dash by performing the warping. So we have performed the warping here, right? 2 by Ts tan of omega by 2. So with this we obtain a new pre-warped analog cutoff frequency, right? There are two ways in which you can use the equation. Either you use 2 by Ts or you skip 2 by Ts, changing the equation as omega dash tan of omega by 2. This reduces the calculations, right? This reduces the calculations. So either you go for this particular equation wherein you are using 2 by Ts tan of omega by 2. This gives us the equation of pre-warped analog cutoff frequency, or there is another way of using the same equation wherein you skip the term 2 by Ts and just use tan of omega by 2. If you use this equation, then you need to modify the replacement of S in terms of Z. I'll discuss that in the next slide. So we have used this equation tan of omega by 2 and obtained the new analog pre-warped cutoff frequency. Now in step number 3, we apply BZT. In step number 3, we insert this analog frequency into the system, as you could see here, S upon omega dash. Since it's a low pass to low pass transformation, we are first of all inserting this new cutoff frequency into the system by replacing S by omega dash, because it's a low pass to low pass transformation. You could see here I have replaced and inserted the new cutoff frequency into the transfer function by replacing S in the given equation by S by omega dash. And now in the next step we apply BZT. So you could see here we have applied BZT. We know the actual relationship is 2 by Ts 1 minus Z inverse by 1 plus Z inverse. Since we have skipped 2 by Ts in the pre-warping equation, we have to even skip 2 by Ts. That has an equivalent effect, right? Because they mutually get cancelled when we actually substitute it here. And that's the reason we have simplified the calculation by skipping those terms. The meaning is one and same. So S is replaced by 2 by Ts. By skipping 2 by Ts, we have obtained a new equation of S to be 1 minus Z inverse 1 plus Z inverse, which reduces the calculation. So now we apply BZT, and wherever there is S in the transfer function, we have replaced S by 1 minus Z inverse by 1 plus Z inverse. And in the process of applying BZT, we know that here the frequencies will be warped. But since we have taken the care of pre-warping it earlier, so pre-warping and this warping effect will compensate and the frequencies will not be distorted. And that's the reason why we had pre-warped it earlier, because we know that when we apply BZT, when we do this transformation, the frequencies are going to be warped. But as we have taken the care, now the effect will be nullified and there will not be any kind of non-linear relationship observed between the analog and digital frequencies. So simplifying this, the equation which is obtained is as shown here. Further, you can take inverse Z transform and obtain the equation in time domain also. So this is how you design the problems using BZT method. There's one more problem which is discussed here. Design high pass filter for the same specifications. So for the same problem that we discussed earlier, we can design even a high pass filter because we have all the transformations available with us. Given a low pass filter, we can obtain a high pass filter and all the other filters also. So the procedure remains the same. The cutoff frequency was 100 Hertz. So the first step remains is we need to transform the given analog specifications into digital specifications. So we have used the normalized frequency and obtained the digital cutoff frequency. Before we apply BZT, we need to pre-warp the frequencies. So we have pre-warped the frequencies here. We have inserted the pre-warp frequencies into the transfer function by replacing omega this time by omega dash by S, because we are performing low pass to high pass transformation. This is the modification that happens. Since we are designing a high pass filter, we need to use the transformation which is omega dash by S. So what we will be doing is we will be replacing S by omega dash by S. In the earlier case, we had done it by replacing S by omega dash. But since we are here designing a high pass filter, we will use the transformation of low pass to high pass transformation. And what is that transformation? If we replace S by omega dash by S, we obtain a high pass filter. So I have replaced wherever there is S, we had been given the transfer function. In that transfer function, we'll replace S by omega dash by S. With this, we are inserting the pre-warp frequencies into the system. So this is the new transfer function that we have obtained, which is now the transfer function of a high pass filter. The next method is we apply the BZT by replacing S by 1 minus Z inverse 1 plus Z inverse, and we simplify and get the resultant transfer function of high pass filter. So this is with these two examples we understand the procedure of solving problems using BZT method. Let us have a close comparison of IIR and FIR filters. So IIR filters are basically preferred where there is sharp cutoff required, because IR filter gives us sharp cutoff as compared to FIR filters. We have seen that in FIR filters we have to do sudden truncations to reduce the size of the impulse response, and to make it finite we need to truncate the FIR, we need to truncate the impulse response, and the truncation results in the Gibbs phenomenon, which is nothing but oscillations in the pass band, oscillations in the stop band. And therefore what we observe is we are having a large number of pass band ripple and stop band ripple along with transition width observed in FIRs, resulting in variation or deviation in the cutoff frequencies, whereas that is not the case when we go for IIR filters. If there is no truncation involved, we can obtain sharp cutoff filters in case of IIR filters, right? Whereas the disadvantage of IR filters is that we cannot obtain the linear phase characteristics as observed in FIR filters. FIR filters always offers linear phase characteristics because after truncating we can choose the impulse response as symmetric impulse response. If we maintain that symmetric impulse response, we'll always obtain the linear phase characteristics. But that is not the case when we go for IR filters. So IR filters are generally offering non-linear phase, right? And there is also a stability concern with IIR filters, because if there is any pole that deviates from the left half of the plane and goes outside the circle, now then it results into a unstable IIR filter. So stability effect is of very large concern, right? Because whenever we design IIR filters, we always have to check the stability of the system and be very careful in the poles that we have obtained. Any shift in the pole from inside inside the circle to outside the circle may result into unstable system. So IIR filters are preferred when we need to go for sharp cutoff with the loss that